Hey, Fredda.
Hey,
How are
Jen.
you? I'm so excited for today's Behind the Book. Tell us what's going to happen.
I know, here we are again. So hello and welcome to Behind the Book with Hawk Koch. For our new visitors, the series began last year on campus to bring best-selling authors to the Wasserman campus, to the residents, and with COVID, we were able to, through the magic of Zoom and Facebook, broaden our reach, not only to the authors, thank you, Stephanie, for being here, and to increase our audience, but also to raise awareness of MPTF, the Motion Picture and Television Fund. So check us out at www.mptf.com if you want to learn more about us. But for right now, it's always my greatest pleasure to introduce our very good friend and MPTF board member, Hawk Koch, who is the host of this series. Thank you, Hawk.
Thanks, Fredda. Thanks, Jen. And welcome, everybody. We have an amazing guest today. Her name is Stephanie Arnold. She wrote a book called 37 Seconds, which became a bestseller. And before you meet her, I want you to hear and see her story. So we're gonna dial up this video, this short piece that described what actually happened to her. So please, roll the tape.
I knew 100% I was going to die giving birth to my son. I had premonitions for months, detailing how it was going to happen. They were terrifying. I told everyone who would listen. And then it happened. I gave birth to a healthy baby boy, and 3 seconds later, I died. I had an amniotic fluid embolism, where amniotic cells get into the mother's bloodstream, and if you happen to be allergic to it, in most cases, you don't survive. I flatlined for 37 seconds. Had a heart attack, acute kidney failure, hysterectomy, blood transfusions, and was put into a medically induced coma. Post-trauma, I needed psychological help. I went into regression therapy, which uses hypnotherapy to take the patient back to the trauma.
That EKG machine went flat.
It was like a movie playing in front of me in 3D. I was able to see my anesthesiologist by my feet, who hit the button for the code, which nurse gave me CPR. Hard to believe it could be true, but when all of it was verified by those who were there was no denying it. There is not a day that goes by that I don't feel blessed, and not a day that goes by that I don't appreciate life.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So here she is, Stephanie Arnold. Stephanie, if you'll hit your video. There she is. Hi, Steph.
Hi, Hawk. How are you?
Good. How you doing? How's Chicago?
Well, it's warm right now, so it's all good.
Oh, good. Well, it's warm in California, too. Your premonition, your intuition, and your perseverance saved your life.
Yeah.
How are you and your family doing now? Everybody okay?
Yeah, I mean, they don't like it when I say I have a feeling about something. Everybody just stops. But no, everybody is healthy. Everybody is good. Outside of the whole COVID thing, everything about life is back to normal. Pretty
Good.
much.
Well, so we saw this clip. So tell us now, you're 5 months pregnant with your second child. And where does this premonition come from? Are you in the middle of, are you sleeping, or are you walking down the street and all of a sudden, boom, you get a premonition? How does that happen?
Yeah, so this was our second biological child. The first child I have is my stepdaughter. That we went through 7 rounds of IVF to have the 2 biological that we have. And so the first child, I had a normal pregnancy, gave birth at 41 weeks, no issue, no premonitions, no problem, except she was too big. And so I ended up having a C-section. But with the second one, I was 5 months pregnant. So at the 20-week ultrasound, I was diagnosed with a placenta previa, which is basically where the placenta is growing on top of the cervix. It's a 1 in 200 risk. It's not usually a big deal, but there's something that sat inside of me, like made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, that said, I have a very rare blood type as being an O negative. And I don't want to be special in any category. I've got a bad feeling about this.
You said this in the doctor's office?
In the doctor's office to my husband. And so my husband, just for perspective, my husband's a PhD from University of Chicago. He's an economist. He was a former Air Force pilot. He is analytical, linear statistics that drives him. And so he looks at me and he's like, honey, we don't have all the facts. Let's just relax and don't worry about it. Let's just listen to what the doctor said. Doctor said, don't worry, just relax. I go home and I start Googling what a placenta previa is, and that it can convert into a placenta accreta, which is basically where the placenta marries itself to the uterus. If that happens, and in a certain percentage it does, it's what Kim Kardashian had. If that happens, you could potentially need a hysterectomy. If you need a hysterectomy, you could bleed. If you bleed, it could turn into a hemorrhage, and worst case scenario is you and the baby could die. And at that moment, I sat back and I looked at my husband and I said, this is going to happen to us. The only difference is the baby's going to be fine.
And just from looking at the computer and reading all this, you just...
It was a knowing. It was, you know, the difference between like how I talk about a premonition and a casual thought is like, you could be sitting on an airplane and say, oh, planes crash all the time. Get that out of my head. That's a crazy thought. And then everything's fine. A premonition, it sticks with you. It's incessant. It will not leave you. I had visions from the day I heard about this little pregnancy complication at 20 weeks up until the day I gave birth. During the day, at night, during dreams, I would see something and then I would have a visceral reaction to it. It was nonstop.
Wow. And you went and talked to not only your OBGYN, but you talked to anybody in the market, right?
Anybody. I mean, if you would have seen me at Starbucks and said, oh, how's your pregnancy going? I'd be like, I'm going to die. It was so bad. Like, friends would stop talking to me. They were worried about me, but they didn't know what to say or how to calm me down. I mean, I had appointments with any nurses, any doctors. You had your monthly appointment up into a certain week with the pregnancy. But then you go to weekly, and then every single week I'd have another appointment, and I would tell the doctors and nurses, whoever would talk to me, I'd be like, this is going to happen. How do I prepare myself for a hemorrhage? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I, ultimately, my OB was a little nervous. She was like, well, are you still having these visions? You're going to give birth at Northwestern, which is a very big teaching hospital here in Chicago. Do you have any question? I'm like, well, we have a friend of ours who was a fellow gynecological oncologist. And I said, who gives a hysterectomy in an emergent situation when you give birth? And he's like, Stephanie, what you're afraid of happening is never going to happen. And I said, well, just entertain me. Like, what happens? He's like, well, on the off chance you need a hysterectomy, the OB can't do it, so they're going to transfer you to maternal fetal medicine. But you really don't want an MFM to do it. You want a gyn-onc to do it because they have more experience with high risk pregnancy, surgeries with reproductive organs, everything. And I said, okay. So I made an appointment with the head of gynecological oncology at Northwestern 2 months before I gave birth. And of course, everybody, just like everybody in the audience or listening to this, is thinking, this woman is crazy, right? So they're like, what kind of cancer do you have? Why, who referred you to this doctor? And I'm like, look, I need to go to this appointment. So we're sitting in the waiting room, and Jonathan went with me my husband went with me to every single appointment, probably because he didn't want to get divorced, but he went with me to every single appointment. And he's sitting there, and these women are suffering from reproductive organ cancer. And he's like, I mean, they have no hair, they have IVs, they're suffering. And he's like, I am embarrassed to be here. And I said, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe this doctor has heard of some crazy foreboding experience with a pregnant woman and can alert me to something that I'm unaware of, and then we can fix it. But I feel like this is a life and death situation for me too, except nobody believes me.
So are, like, in the middle of the night, are you having dreams beforehand of actually seeing yourself dying? Or?
It is, I'm walking in the grocery store and I'm buying flour or something, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing my funeral. I am seeing being in a dream, I saw being cut from sternum to pelvis and open and left open on the operating table with blood hemorrhaging out.
That's a little too much for me.
Sorry. I mean, I can go into the vagina stuff too, but I don't think you want to do
No, thanks.
so, so at some point the gyneco was like, how can I help you, Mrs. Arnold? And I said, well, you're going to give me a hysterectomy when I deliver this baby. And he's like, have you been on the internet? And I said, why, yes, I have, but this is going to happen. And he's like, okay, well, why don't we get an MRI and see if everything's okay? And the MRI turned out to be negative for the merger between the placenta and the uterus. And so my husband looks at me and says, you should feel better. And I said, well, I don't. I said, now I'm running out of people to tell this crazy foreboding story to. So ultimately the doctor recommended I go have a consultation with anesthesia.
So
and
hang on a second. I think Jen might have a question.
Oh, go ahead. I'll shut up now. Go ahead.
Jen, do you have a question?
I don't. No, it's all good. Thanks.
Oh,
Keep
I
going.
just saw your face. Sorry.
That's all right.
So sorry to interrupt. So you went to see an anesthesiologist.
Right. So I had a phone call with an anesthesiologist and she said, how can we help you? And I said, and she explained to me what would happen when I deliver the baby, where the epidural, recovery, all of that. I said, I know that. I've had a baby before, had a C-section before. What happens in the event that this, and this happens? And she said she was startled by that, but she still kept a strong front and said, look, you're in a teaching hospital. We've seen a lot, we're prepared for a lot and you'll be fine. And I felt like still no one was listening. So I took to Facebook. I said, if anybody has my blood type, I'm going to need it. Not because I knew logistically they would have been able to give me the blood, but it was like maybe somebody would have heard something or heard my desperation in my voice.
Maybe a Russian troll may have watched.
Maybe. I wrote goodbye letters. I sent out goodbye letters. I told people exactly what was going to happen to me in a few short weeks.
And did anybody want to send you to Bellevue, a psychological place? Or
I mean, even my rabbi was like, Stephanie, God helps those who help themselves. And I said, I am trying to help myself, but at some point I'm banging my head against the wall. And my husband said he didn't want to give any of my premonitions any kind of credence because he felt maybe there was something wrong with the baby. And that was why I was acting so crazy.
Okay, so all of this is happening and your husband is flying back and forth to New York because he's got work in New York. And you're a few weeks before you're supposed to have the C-section.
Correct. I'm supposed to have a C-section at 30.
He's in New York.
He's in New York and I'm in Chicago, and at 37 weeks, I was supposed to have the mandatory C-section because there was, the Previa issue. So at 36 weeks to the day, I start bleeding all over the kitchen floor and I know that this is D-Day. So I get to the hospital and I text Jonathan and he's in a meeting. I'm like, we're having this baby today. He races to get back. He's in the air. I get triaged. And the doctors are like, look, Stephanie, the ORs are quiet right now. Why don't we take Jacob and take him out and deliver the baby? And I said, can't we hold off? And she's like, your blood pressure's a little higher. Let's just take him. And so, I'm texting Jonathan the last thing that he's going to read, on this computer. I'm like, you've made me the happiest woman in the world. Please take care of this child. Please love our children and know that I love you with all of my heart. And the fear was quite palpable because I knew that the day that I was going to give birth was the day that I was going to die. So I know I was moments away from it. So it's like, everybody was seeing an open road and I kept seeing this 18-wheeler heading straight for me, but everybody's like, hey, it's sunny and it's beautiful and it's a great open road. And just the pressure was really intense. So I said whatever I said, and then Jonathan, still not giving it any credence, said, where do I meet you? And I said, 8th floor recovery, hopefully.
You didn't say heaven.
No, I didn't. I said, hopefully. And then I hugged my daughter, Adina, who was almost 2 at the time. And the mother's instinct kicked in and I just didn't want her to see me crying or the last image of her mother to be that. I kissed her a million times, and as soon as the gurney took me around the corner, I broke down crying because I was convinced that that was the last time I was going to see her. And as I'm being wheeled down to the OR, I tell my doctor, who's a friend of mine, I said, Julie, there's something wrong. You need to put me under general anesthesia. And she said, Stephanie, I know you're nervous. Jonathan's not here. If I put you under general, I'm going to put the baby to sleep. And that was my last ditch effort. And so here it is. I'm being wheeled into the room that's going to give life to my son and take mine. And so you're in a T shape. There's a curtain in front of your face when you're preparing for a C-section. And they delivered a very happy and healthy baby boy. And seconds later, I died.
You flatlined. And
Technically dead for 37 seconds. I ended up having.
During that 37 seconds, as of when you came out of that, eventually, you didn't remember what happened in those 37 seconds. But obviously, all kinds of things went wrong. Luckily, the anesthesiologist had a crash cart, and the first crash cart wasn't no good, NG.
Right. Well, so it was interesting. I predicted a lot of things, but what I didn't predict is that there would be extra life-saving measures within the operating room. And later I found out that the anesthesiologist was uncomfortable with our conversation. And because of that call, she flagged my file and incorporated extra blood in a crash cart.
Did you send her an Oscar or anything? I mean, what is
yeah.
Is she adopted by you?
Yeah, I speak a lot at her hospital to doctors, and she uses our case as a really important one to discuss a patient and a doctor's intuition. So she, I ended up having amniotic fluid embolism, which is a 1 in 40,000 risk where amniotic cells get into the mother's bloodstream. And if you happen to be allergic to it, your body goes into somewhat of an anaphylactic shock. So I flatlined for 37 seconds. I was brought back up with the crash cart. I was intubated. My eyes were taped shut. And then your body goes into DIC, which is your body's inability to clot blood. And anesthesiologists like to joke about, they've created their own acronym for it called death is coming. Your normal body has 20 units of blood. I was given 60 units of blood and blood product to save my life. And then I was placed in a medically induced coma. And that's when Jonathan arrived at the hospital.
So just to back up, you're a TV producer. You produce commercials and music videos. And so me being a producer, I know that perseverance is one of the things that if you're any good, you better have a lot of perseverance.
Yeah.
So is that what kept you going through all that kind of experience that you had of being a producer? How did you, I don't know if I could get through those last 3-4 months.
Yeah, I've wondered that a lot because I think, as a producer, and I was working for Endemol and other companies and producing shows. I mean, I think what you do is you don't take no for an answer. It's like you just figure out there's different ways to skin this cat. The only difference is I was dealing with health and medical issues. And if the tests were all negative, all of the tests were negative for what I had, if they're negative, what does the science say about it? What do the doctors say? What can they do? I mean, at least when you're producing a show, it's like, okay, the construction saying you can't do this because you only have this amount of budget. Well, okay, I'll figure out what I'm going to do with this. And then what am I going to do with this? So I think that definitely played a part in me not shutting up. Many people have said to me, after the 4th and 5th doctor or clinician said, you're stressed, you need to relax. I would have stayed quiet. And I said, then you would have stayed dead. So
you go into a medically induced coma. It's what, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? How long were you in?
Yeah, it's a week. And I had, my kidneys failed. I was on dialysis. At some point, Jonathan, when he got to the hospital, he said, if she needs a hysterectomy, this is a doctor we met with. They said, she's not strong enough for another surgery right now, but I think we've stopped the bleed. Hours later, they realized I was still bleeding and they called in the head of gynonc to perform the hysterectomy. When they did the pathology on the uterus, they saw that this accreta that I had thought about had already started to form, but it was microscopic and in a place where the MRI didn't pick it up. And so everything I thought about, every premonition I had come true. By day 7 or by day 6. So because we're Jewish, I had a boy. There's a bris that has to happen, a circumcision. And that happened day 8, right? So my husband calls the rabbi. He's like, what do I do? He's like, well, as long as the baby is healthy, you have to have the circumcision. And so he's like, well, I want my wife to be there. And he says, I don't know what to do. And the rabbi says, you pray. And so everybody, doctors, nurses, friends, family, they all prayed. And on day 6, they extubated me to see how neurologically damaged I was. And the very first thing I saw was my swollen belly because I was severely edemic. And the very first thing I said is, am I still fucking pregnant? And my husband's like, she's gonna be just fine.
So, okay, you come out of it.
Yeah.
Not that this hasn't been anything,
no.
but you come out of it and you want to know what went on.
Yeah.
And I had never heard of this. I don't know why. My wife's a shrink, but regression therapy.
That's the therapist calling. That's it.
Yeah, that's somebody who's premonition that I don't know, my taxes.
That's God telling you what. So
tell me about regression therapy and why you decided to do it and what happened.
Sure. Well, I spent a month in the hospital. I tried to get answers. The doctors were like, how did you know? They said, foreboding exists when one has a heart attack or an embolus, maybe moments before, days before, but months before, knowing exactly, no. Some said self-fulfilling prophecy, but they didn't believe in that. And I was not able to become the wife and mother I wanted to be. Physically, I was getting better, getting off of the dialysis, out of a wheelchair. I was starting to read again, but emotionally, I was a wreck because what if I had another premonition? What if I spontaneously combust? It was not logical thinking, but it was based on everything that happened. And I didn't have any answers as to how it happened. I needed answers. So I ended up doing this hypnotherapy, and I videotaped my therapy, as you saw a little bit on that clip, mostly because I've never been hypnotized before, and I didn't know if I'd remember anything. And so when we did about 30 hours of recording, and by that time I had started to develop a rapport with her, and I trusted her enough to take me back to the OR. And the interesting thing is what she talks about with hypnotherapy is that trauma gets stored in cells in the body, but like film strips in your brain, and you can access them when things are quite in a meditative state, but you can't when you're in fight or flight mode. And so if there was a way to find out if I had seen the light, if I had seen anything, or if there were any reasons to believe that somebody else was helping me through the premonitions, then I wanted to find out. So during this time, you see on the tape, like I have a seizure, I convulse, and then all of a sudden everything becomes very clear in 3D. Like I see who hit the button for the code, that the first crash cart didn't work, but the second one did, which nurse jumped on my chest and did CPR. Now, that my doctor didn't deliver the baby, what my daughter was doing in the labor and delivery room down the hall, what my husband was wearing when he got off the plane. It just was so much download. And people talk, well, maybe it's like 37 seconds is not really 37 seconds. I'm like, it's not. Time and space in a different dimension is a lot bigger because it's quieter. And so now you can pick up everything. And so it was just a lot. And then when I came out of it, I felt better. And Jonathan took 1 second look at the tape, and in true Jonathan Arnold fashion, he's like, hey, that's not a recalled episode of Grey's Anatomy in your head. And I was like,
so you had to go and talk to all the witnesses, the people who were actually in the OR.
Because my therapist said sometimes the only validation we get is the patient feels better. And he's like, Stephanie, you feel better. And I said, that's not good enough for me. The producer in my head is like, no, if I'm crazy, I'm crazy. But you know what? I have witnesses. So let me take the tapes, because I had video of it, And it's not hearsay, and let me see what they say. And at the end of the day, they all looked at it and said, I didn't go to medical school for this. You shouldn't know this. You were asystolic. There's
So
no.
take us through. So you went, you found out through your regression therapy that in fact your OBGYN didn't deliver, and she hadn't told you this, right?
She had. So I said to Jonathan, I said, our OB didn't deliver the baby. And he's like, why would you say that? I said, because I saw it in my regression therapy. And he's like, okay, honey. I said, by the way, I saw his father passed away in 1998. Your father had a message for you. And, it's about a coin. And I'm trying to figure out what the message is. And I'm going through the details of the coin and all of these other things. And he's like, say hi to my dad. And he walked out, it was like, none of it was logical. So, the doctors, the one doctor, I said, my anesthesiologist, I said, were there 2 crash carts? I said, the first one didn't light up. And so she's like, you'd think I'd remember that because we were all traumatized by a situation, but I don't remember it. I said, can you check? Would it be in my medical file? And she said, no, it wouldn't be in the medical file, but I'll ask the other anesthesiologist who was present. And sure enough, there was a second crash cart brought in. Then I said to my doctor, I said, did you say this can't be happening? This can't be happening. And she said, I did, but in my head. And then I said to her, and Jonathan was in front of me, I said, you didn't deliver the baby. And Jonathan's interrupting. Yes, you did. There was blood all over your scrubs and everything. And I said, and she said, of course I was there, but I didn't deliver the baby. I said, let me ask you another question. I said, did the gyn-onc resident who was taking notes during my consultation with the head of gyn-onc, there was a resident taking notes who stopped, who rolled her eyes at me, who was just like, this woman's crazy. We need to get back to real work. Did she deliver the baby? And she said, Stephanie, we're in a teaching hospital. And when the residents are around, we offer them first to come in and deliver the baby. She happened to be in the back hallways 15 minutes before your procedure. And I invited her in to deliver the baby. And she looks at me, she says, how do you know that?
Wow. And then to talk about the nurse who gave you CPR.
Yeah, so that I had gone back a year later to thank everybody and, for saving my life. And this one nurse who had moved to management comes up to me and says, Mrs. Arnold, just really great to see you. You wouldn't remember me. I said, you're the nurse that broke my ribs. And she said, and I would do it again to save her life. And she turned around and she went back to her office, and I was later told she broke down crying. She's like, she shouldn't have known that.
Wow.
I shouldn't have known it. But the doctors were like, I'll give you hearing is the last to go, but after your eyes are taped shut and you're intubated, it's like, that your hearing is last to go, you most certainly couldn't see. So it's changed the way that they practice medicine 100%.
Wow. So now, that's quite a story. And for those of you who want to read the book, as great as this is, there's more to it. And being transparent, Molly and I, as some of you know, I wrote a book with Molly called Magic Time, My Life in Hollywood. And a friend of mine was doing a webinar. And the reason I know so much about Stephanie in the book is A, I read the book, but B, a week after the webinar, it was David Kirkpatrick, who used to be head of Paramount.
Yep.
And he had said, I said, listen, you ever come across someone who's got a great idea for a movie? Let me know. And he called me and he said, well, there's this woman who wants to meet you. And take it from there, Stephanie.
Yeah, so I had seen Hawk on the webinar, and David was gracious enough to, say when the script is ready. And he mentored me a great deal to say, when it's ready, it's ready. And so when it was finally ready, I had seen Hawk on this, on the webinar, and I texted David while he was on it, and I said, I think he's my producer. And so he's like, well, I'll send it to him. And, he's like, that might be interesting. And intuitively, he felt similarly. And so he sent the script. And then, was it like a couple of days later that you called?
So can I just ask, is there a premonition that we're going to win an Oscar or something? What's your premonition about?
I'm working my ass off, Hawk. I'm working my ass. So
Well, no, truthfully, as a, let me just see if I can get the,
Well, so there were
you have a history of premonitions from the time you were a little kid?
So I've had visions. I talk about being, as a kid, I was on low voltage. I knew the moment my grandmother died of a heart attack, I felt it in my body.
But you weren't with her.
I was not. I was 3,000 miles away. It was a moment that I felt, it was an instant jolt. And I told my father, I'm like, have you spoken to grandma? And he's like, no, but I'll give her a call tomorrow. It was the exact moment she died of a massive coronary. The same thing happened a couple years after with my uncle, who I was very close to. And I hugged him in between the high holidays, and I just had an overwhelming sadness. He was healthy. He was running 5 miles a day, but I had overwhelming sadness that this was going to be the last time I saw him, and he died 2 days later. So as a kid at 10, 11, 12 years old, you think you're willing it to happen. So you just stop thinking of it, you compartmentalize it. And I did that until it was my own foreboding. Now, when I feel things, I say it. And we both know Gail Berman and kind of how that story, if you want me to.
Right, sure. Go. Gail Berman, before I got involved, Gail
before
Berman
you got involved. So
optioned your book as a
right.
possible TV show.
Right. So, but the way that happened was quite interesting. And I you know, when people who I know, who I've respected in TV have said, you know, this book is a scripted series, it's not my world. So I trust them and I said, but I feel it's a movie. I don't know, maybe a made for TV movie. I don't know, but I feel like it's a movie. And so I go and I have a meeting with Gail. I don't know Gail. I don't know any of her people. Joe Early is there, a bunch of her scripted, unscripted features. Everybody's in the meeting. And for those of you who know Gail, know that what she's about to say to me is exactly Gail Berman. And she says to me, Stephanie, your story's very interesting, but I'm a skeptical person. And I said, okay, I've got nothing to prove here. You know, I'm here to talk to you about like possibly a reality show about near-death experiences. And she said, well, I'm not saying that I don't believe in intuition. It's just never happened to me. So in the middle of the meeting, we're talking, and our mutual friend, Missy Halpern, had brought me into the meeting, and I'm starting to sweat and I'm starting to feel like I'm going to have a heart attack, but I know it's not mine. And all of a sudden I'm feeling the strain down my left side. So I know it's coming from a male family member. And I say this, I don't remember saying this. So it was a form of an out of body experience, but I say to Gail, apparently I said it because everybody said I said it. I said to Gail, there's a woman standing next to you. I believe it's your mother. And she's talking about a dress. And Gail's like, nah, my mother's fine. Everything's fine. Okay. No, I'm sorry, guys. Somebody's here trying to tell me something. Apparently I'm talking about a ghost. I'm like talking about like somebody had a male family member who just had a heart attack. You know, please check in with your family. I don't know. Okay, Stephanie, here's your valet ticket. Really nice to meet you. You've got to go, right? So pitch is blown. Everything's done. For some reason, I had, as I was leaving it, released, but I went back to Gail's office and I said, I'm so sorry. This never happened. I said, can you please check in with your family? Again, kicks me out. I leave. Joe Early calls me about 4 days later and he says, are you sitting down? And I said, yes. He says, well, so Gail lied to you. Her mother's passed for many years and she knew exactly the dress you were talking about. So everybody thought it was weird, and I'll go back to her office, and she was in LA, and she's like, she got a call from her sister in New York. Her father had a heart attack at the moment I was feeling it. He's going to be fine. She's in New York now, and we're buying your rights. And I was like, okay, well, that's a hell of a way to get your rights bought. And so ultimately, it didn't sell. And then I got the rights back. And then I met David Kirkpatrick, and then he had told me, he's like, I think it's a movie as long as you can bring it out and get the script, and met a writer and started to get things moving. And then we met each other, and then I had an intuitive moment with you. So I don't know. It's Basheret.
Wow. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this so far. I have a few questions of this seer, Mrs. Arnold. And you talked about everything that was going on in the hospital during those 37 seconds as you regression. But do you think there's life after death? Do you think it exists?
I know there's life after death. I know it because of what I continue to see.
Oh, well, tell us.
So I have experienced, I'm like, even with your own mother, you know, when reading your book, it's too personal. We could skip over.
Go ahead.
No, I have asked out loud to people that I have seen, and it's, and I don't know whether it's because of the background in television, but I see things in frames. So if I see a silhouette or I see a person attached to somebody else or next to them, it's usually in a frame or two, and then I see a moment. And then either I hear a message or I have to sleuth the message. So in the case of, you know, when I was reading your book, there was a moment you talk about why your mother called you Howard Koch Jr. And that was in Judaism, it's unusual for one to be called after their living parent. And out loud, it was like 10 o'clock at night. I remember when it was, because I texted you afterwards. I was like, why would you do that? And I was thinking about your mother in that moment, and the message came like clear in two different ways, like hit me in one, you know, and what I've learned is if I don't say it immediately, then it usually gets messed up in the game of telephone. If I say it immediately, it's usually like almost verbatim of what the spirit wanted you to know. And in my case, I feel that life, when it ends, we go from a solid to a gas. So we're made up of energy, and I keep feeling energy off of people. So we don't lose our loved ones. They're there. I firmly believe that my uncle was around me, giving me those premonitions and being very clear about what they were, and being like, you are strong. You have to speak up. Because the only thing I craved during my entire pregnancy was cigarettes. And I've never smoked a cigarette in my life, and I have asthma. So why, you know, it was just a very strong tell that I was around someone who loved me.
So, but in the regression therapy, you weren't in heaven somewhere.
No,
You didn't see your relatives or anybody else.
I did. I saw in the therapy I did, which was confusing to me, because it's like, am I reconnecting to those actual moments of 37 seconds or in the subsequent coma? I can't tell where the timing was, but it was definitely heavenly. So it was white, it was warm, there were no buildings, but there were hundreds and hundreds of spirits. So I will give you that a lot of times psychologists will tell you that when you're in trauma, that you really want your loved ones to be present to carry you to the other side. But it's the ones I didn't know that were there. Like, for instance, I'd never met Jonathan's father. He had been dead 10 years since, when I met him. And so when he showed up, he had a tweed jacket on, he had patches on the elbows, it was yellow with like a green stripe. And then there was a coin, and it was a coin that was a foreign coin, but I described the metal and I described the insignia on it, but I couldn't understand what it was. And I said to Jonathan, I said, when I told I met your father, and he's like, oh, okay, tell him I said hi. I said, no. I said, he was wearing a tweed jacket. He's like, my father never wore a tweed jacket. And then I go to his mother and I go to his aunt, and he's like, did it have like a green stripe in it and patches on the elbow? I said, yes. So I said to Jonathan, so what are you talking about? That was his favorite jacket, according to your aunt and your mother. And he's like, well, if you would have said herringbone. And I'm like, what the hell's herringbone? And I'm like, oh, it's they have a stitch in a tweed jacket. Like now he's messing with my head. And then the coin, turned out we were with his family, and I was trying to figure out the coin. Nobody in the family knew about the coin. And his younger brother was there, and he's like, oh, how's your therapy going? And Jonathan haphazardly says, oh, she saw dad. He's like, oh, well, tell me about it. I said, do you know anything about a coin? And he's like, funny you mentioned that. He's like, I was going through one of dad's old suitcases the other day, and in the crevice behind the zipper, there was a coin. I said, can you describe that coin to me? And it was almost verbatim what that was. First of all, I cursed my husband out. Then I said, I now understand the message. The coin was from Croatia. And this is the son that was with the father at the moment when he died. And it was during one of the only times London had a big snowstorm and the ambulance couldn't get to the father, and the son had blamed himself for a very long time that what else could he have done to help save his life. And the coin from Croatia was the last moment, like fun memory he had with his father, and he wanted him to focus on that and not the fact that he could have done something to save his life.
So you do believe that life exists after death. So are you afraid of death then?
I am not. I think that the reason that I was racing against a clock to save my life was twofold. I think first, I have this love of my life. I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want, I have this family, I have this new baby that I'm about to give birth to. And for, that was the first reason why I was like racing and scared that it would end. The second thing is like, I had felt that there was something else guiding me and helping me. And God forbid it went the other way and stayed the other way. I wanted Jonathan to open his eyes and understand that I was never going to leave him, no matter what form it was. But I couldn't get his eyes to open. And now, thank God, they are.
You told me something about when you have to attend funerals.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't wear black anymore. I think that, people look at they're mourning over the physical loss, and I get that. The person is no longer there and you can't hold them and you can't touch them. But I wear white because I'm honoring their soul and their spirit, because what tethered them to the ground and what was hurting them and what was making them sick, or however they died physically, they couldn't do whatever they wanted, but now as a spirit they can fly. So no, I'm not scared of it. And I honor death in a way of, there's a sadness because you can no longer hold that person's hand. But I know for a fact the person's there.
Do you think all of us have intuitions, but that we just don't use them?
Yes, I do. I think every single person listening to this has thought about moments, whether it was a job or a relationship or a health issue, that could sit there and say, I knew something was wrong and I didn't speak up and I was wrong. Or I knew I shouldn't have dated that person, or I knew I shouldn't have married that person. And then ultimately
I didn't listen.
You didn't listen. So I believe we all have it. I think that the trusting it is hard. And especially in a medical situation and a health issue, I think it's hard because you're being put into a box and they're checking off, no, you don't have this, but your intuition is telling you something else. And speaking up when you sense something is wrong is really important, because the worst thing that can happen is you get judged. Okay. So everybody could judge you. Okay. Everybody was judging me. And if nothing happened, I'd send them flowers and chocolate, say, I'm never having another baby again. You're right. I was crazy. There was too much testosterone in my blood, whatever it was. But you will never regret speaking up and being wrong, but you will if something does happen and you were right.
I don't know the rest of you, but I bet you do, how many times I'll think of somebody and then all of a sudden the phone will ring and it's them. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
It's in part, it's part of your sixth sense. Just because you can't categorize it in one of the five senses hardly means it doesn't exist. So it's just trusting it more. I mean, you trusted it when you met Molly walking up that mountain. You trusted it when you were like, it doesn't matter where it came from. It just, the likelihood that the two of you would have met at that particular moment, when you could have gone for your coffee at that moment, she could have said, you know what, I'm still not available. Whatever it was. And the same thing for my husband and I, or in any given situation. It's just saying, okay, I'm just going to let the universe, God, spirit, however you want to define it, carry you and trust it. But it's all within.
Now, were you a religious person prior to all of this? And did you become more or less religious since then? Yeah. Does religion play as big a part as it did? It's a lot of questions, but
yeah, it is. So So I went to parochial school. I went to a Jewish day school. I grew up with an Orthodox rabbi. But I was always curious and asking questions and pushing for it. I produced a lot of Jewish educational documentaries. I worked with the Rebbe Lubavitch, the Rebbe Schneerson, in New York. And I believe in God. I have faith in God, and I have faith in the spirit around community, tradition, and I love being Jewish. Did it make me more religious? No. What it did do, though, is tie in the loose ends of the questions I had about if this were possible, because throughout biblical times, they talk about seers in the Torah. They talk about seers in the Bible everywhere. And so if this has always been in existence, then this is just part of the story of that each and every one of us just needs to open our eyes, and each one of us has a gift, different ones at different levels, but each one of us has it.
Well, it's interesting because you're not, you're not pompous at all. You're absolutely real. There's just listening to you, I believe everything you're saying. And there are other people who, come on TV or radio or somewhere, and, you go, wait a minute, this is way too far out for me. But what's interesting about you is that you're just, if there is such a thing as normal, you're just a normal person.
Yeah, Jonathan gives the quote, the Sherlock Holmes quote of like, once you eliminate the impossible, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. And coming from a scientist's mind, analytical mind, the way he is, I've kind of adopted the same philosophy. I have talked to many astrophysicists, theoretical physicists, trying to understand, which I can't, quantum entanglement, quantum physics, and such a heady level just to say, well, maybe what this is science hasn't caught up to it yet. There's no scientific explanation, and maybe 100 years or 1,000 years we'll have more of an explanation. And that's fine. But for right now, with the information we have now, this is the only conclusion I can make at this moment. And so I'm going with that because it's happening in my body and it's happening through my experience.
I just heard on the news today that Elon Musk is trying to put a computer in someone's brain.
What's fascinating is the MIT News did an article in 2018 that talked about, AI, artificial intelligence, and how they're using it in hospitals and medical situations to help with diagnostics. And in many cases, I think that that's very, very interesting. However, there's one thing that they said AI cannot duplicate, and that is a doctor's intuition. So what is fascinating to me is that, a doctor, when a patient is brought in under severe trauma in the ICU, a doctor will look at the patient and say, I need these tests. And that comes from an intuitive place. It comes from whether you're seeing patterns, but they're feeling it. They're knowing exactly what that patient needs at that time. AI can't do that and can't duplicate it. So I still think we are our own wiring and need to rely on ourselves.
Tell us the difference between before this happened and now. How has this experience changed you as a person?
I'm more serious. I used to be more like happy-go-lucky, like more joking, having a family definitely puts more pressure and stress on life, but I was a lot lighter. And now dealing with medical boards and patient advocacy and seeing how the reaction is, and how many people are affected by storytelling and how they can relate to it, and the kinds of emails I receive on a weekly basis of people that have been feeling a certain way. It's a matter of life and death. It's not, no one is contacting me for, what kind of clothing are you wearing? They're contacting me because they have a vision, or they have a feeling, or they have a, what they can do in order to help save their lives, or they've lost somebody, or how they can handle their own premonition. So so life is a lot heavier. And with COVID, it's been even heavier than that because I've been homeschooling for 5 months and just.
Right. So let me ask you,
Yeah.
so you came out of it, you're okay, the baby's okay, and are the hospitals and the doctors calling you and saying, will you come in and tell your story? Or how did you decide to write a book about it?
Yeah, so I think, so of course I talked to my old agent as a reality TV producer, Mark Aiken, who was over at WME. And he hadn't represented me like in, I don't know, 15 years or what have you. And so I called him, and our story had been on Good Morning America. And he's like, I saw the story. I was like, everybody keeps telling me, I'm trying to pitch a reality show, but everybody keeps telling me I should write a book. And he put me in touch with the literary agent at WME. And I was smart enough to know that as long as the literary agent was interested, I'd have to just get something into his hands, because I knew then the publishers would take a look at it. And so that's what I did. I said,
had you ever thought all of this? You thought, oh, I'm going to write a book. Had you written like a PhD?
No, I
An
wrote
essay in high school. Come on, you wrote an essay.
An essay in high school, and blogs, and at the end of the day, writing for news, because I worked in news, or writing teases and writing for reality TV. There's no writing in reality TV. So if there's writing that you're doing, it's 22 minutes. It's not 50,000 words. So when the agent said, well, start writing, I'm like, do you have a format? Do you have an outline? Can I use something as a basis? Do you have something? Do you have a ghostwriter? So he's like, if you want me to represent you, you have to write it yourself. And I don't think he knew it intuitively, but it was very helpful for me to process this and go through it. And luckily my cousin, Sari Pador, who's also on the book, was an editor and writer journalist. And so for her, she's known me my whole life. And she's like, all right, let's break it down and what's superfluous to the story. So she helped me in a big way to just take the story, whittle it down to what's important for the reader to take away from this. And then I think HarperCollins thought that it was going to compete with Heaven is for Real and Proof of Heaven. And I'm happy to say it didn't, because the devout are the ones that just ran with that book. And with mine, he was like, or they were like, well, I know all that stuff about premonitions and everything, but I want to hear more about what happened in 37 seconds. And I said, well, I could tell you I was riding a unicorn through a rainbow, but if I can't prove it, then what good does it do you? So ultimately, the people that found the book were the scientific community, the doctors, the universities. I've spoken at the University of Chicago, at the Divinity School and the medical school. I've spoken at the Department of Defense and at Renaissance Weekend where you've spoken. I've spoken at big hospitals and talking about, listening to your gut and also that of your patients, and it will save lives. I think that what it is we're trying to normalize the conversation and using great storytelling as a way for people to listen up to their sixth sense.
And how long did it take you to write the book?
2 weeks.
Yeah, right.
Seriously. So
don't tell me that.
No, I promise.
It took 4 years.
I know, but the thing is you're weaving together stories of your lifetime. This was a particular moment in my life that had a chronological order, and the editor at HarperCollins was like, because I was going back and forth, do I do flashbacks? Do I do this? Do I start from the point of flatline or whatever? And he's like, just go through chronological order. And so it's in 3 acts, and it definitely takes you on a ride, but it wasn't an easy process. I threw up a lot. I cried a lot. Jonathan kept saying, give them money.
Don't tell anybody it only took 2 weeks. That's very...
Well, so the narrative took a few months. No, it took the narrative, by the time the agent was ready to take it to the publishers, took a few months, because I had to get the cadence down and the voice and what I wanted to say. But by the time that it was like, okay, we're off to the races, then it was really 2 weeks to tie everything together. And my hat's off.
How long after the ordeal, was it 6 months you started to think about writing? A year, 2 years?
9 months after.
Wow. You're
You know what?
a real go-getter. You must be a producer.
So 9 months after, only because I think I was blocking out my pain, because the reality is I dealt with some of the cells in the body by writing, and it was purging and purging. But the more that I told the story and talked about it on talk shows and became more of a storyteller, I put myself at a distance because I was telling this story like I'm doing now. But the reality was when I finally lit up that the story actually happened to me, that's when I started going backwards and saying, okay, now I need to process this. So I needed a couple of years after the book came out to really, really stand on solid ground, to realize now I can stand here and say there's no question that life after death exists. But then I was like, I'm just going to talk about what I can prove. This is what I can prove. We're not going to talk about spirits. We're not going to talk, because I thought it was a one and done kind of book. Like, you have premonitions, it's done, saves your life. Okay, we're all good now. Suppress, repress, move on, like my husband likes to say. The reality is I've had more premonitions since then that have really affected the outcome by me stepping in or by me not saying something. And that made me realize, no, this work is not done.
And have people who you've talked to have told you about their premonitions? Have you been able to help them in some way, lead them down a path that you know how to go?
Yeah, I mean,
Anyone particular that you could tell us about?
There've been many, but like there was a woman who posted on Instagram just that she had read my book and she was on the beach. And I'm like, oh, thanks for taking me on vacation with you. And she had private messaged me saying, your book changed my life. I just had a miscarriage. And I had this visceral reaction to it. And I said, I'm so sorry about the miscarriage, but it's going to prepare you for what's about to happen. And she said, what? And I said, you're about to be involved with a catastrophic childbirth. And because of this experience, you're going to have more empathy. And so she's like, well, I'm a doula. And I'm like, that's why the word, like, sometimes the words come out before, and I'm like, who am I to say this to somebody who just put a picture up of it, so of course, she stopped talking to me, because why wouldn't you? Because I'm crazy. So then, I call my rabbi and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I said, it turns out this woman is very religious. I'm like, I shouldn't have said anything. He's like, no, you shouldn't say something like that. I said, that's like going to a psychic. We don't go to psychics. I said, it's not that. And so he's like, Sarah, my Hebrew name, Sarah, just stop sharing it. I said, okay, I've learned my lesson. So then I write a blog. I'm never going to speak up again. It's not, I need a filter. Like, I can't just come out. And then 3 weeks later, I get an instant message from her. And she said, I'm not ignoring you. She's like, but one of the doulas in my group delivered her niece's 8th child. The baby was delivered okay. The mother had an amniotic fluid embolism and died on the table. And because you and I had a conversation, I was able to get in touch with the AFE Foundation, of which I sit on the board with. We were able to work together to help the family through the trauma, and then the doula group, the same, so that, the second victim of these clinicians who help these women get treatment too and get help. So.
And are there people who've talked to you about life after death experiences also that maybe they've had?
They do. I used to poo-poo it, and I used to say, are you smoking a joint on top of a mountaintop and talking to God, and I think that I did a disservice to those people, because, negating their own experience, however it might be, whether they are on heavy meds or not, is irrelevant. I think that many of us explained some of the things we saw. That I'd say that the difference between mine and theirs is that I had these premonitions leading up to it, so it gives it more credibility, but I'm just here validating what other people saw, and that doesn't make mine more credible than theirs. It just means that they have no witnesses.
Well, the great MPTF producer, Jen Clymer, has just joined us.
Yes.
Jen, did you have a question or a comment or something?
I do. I've got both. A reminder that you can ask questions. If you're on the webinar, you can ask in the Q&A, or if you're watching from your home here at MPTF, you can call us at 1221. But I had a question of my own, and then Fredda has a question as well.
Okay.
Stephanie, do you think that things are preordained, like all of the fight? You know exactly where I'm going. So
Yep.
Is it free will? Is it changeable, or was all of this so that you could share this story? And
I love this question so much because it's such a personal experience with this, but I do not. And my rabbi can yell at me, and my husband can yell at me, and whatever it is, but I do not believe they run on the same path. I believe one can have free will and still have predestination. So what my husband will say, what the rabbis will say, and anybody religious will say, was always in the cards that you were going to survive. Okay, I'll give that to you. Like, we all have an expiration date. It's written in stone somewhere. What I believe firmly is that it was my free will to speak up and how well I would survive, because I could have shut the hell up. And so, you know, a friend of mine, Rosa, said the other day, said, yeah, but because you're a producer, because you're outspoken, it was always in the cards that you were just going to speak up. And I said, I hear what you're saying. I said, but I had a choice in each and every one of those meetings to speak up. And I chose to speak up. So for me, free will exists separate and apart from predetermination.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like, okay, Northwestern's had been in existence for like 30 plus years. They deliver 12,000 babies a year. They've had, at the time of my AFE, amniotic fluid embolism, they've had 10. 6 did not make it, and the other 3 are in permanent vegetative states. So, and we have some horrific outcomes at the foundation. So the likelihood of surviving as the catastrophic AFE that I had is so small, not just so small about having it, but surviving it as well as I did is so small. And I think that is in a direct reaction to my free will. Because if I was listening to my husband or anybody else, I, stay quiet. Tests are fine. Just keep it moving.
Also,
and you said Fredda has it. Oh, we have a question here from Edgar. Oh, sorry, Fredda, you
That's
asked
okay.
your question.
Being a reality TV producer,
Yeah.
I imagine that you were a skeptic about a lot of things, as am I, but I also struggle with believing in things that aren't science-based.
Yeah.
So how did you, when you first started getting the premonitions, did you try to fight it? At what point did you think, maybe there really is something here? And how has that changed the way you look at other things that you otherwise would have thought, yeah, no.
It's a very good question. I think when the first premonition hit at the 20-week mark, it was so on point that I didn't question where it was coming from. I didn't care whether it was coming from God, spirit, science. Maybe there was something, and obviously there was something physiologically happening, but it was happening months down the road. That I cannot make the scientific connection, neither can the doctors. But the foreboding and everything was so real. I was having a visceral reaction to what I was seeing. And I'm not a histrionic, neurotic person, as you are not as well. So if you're sitting there and you're feeling just this discomfort in your own skin, and something is telling you, do not get in that car today, or do not take a left instead of right, going against it, what's the worst that could happen? You could be dead right, or you could be wrong. And so if it's not like, this one woman had said to me, like, I keep having these dreams, I'm going to die in a car crash. I'm going to die in a car crash, die in a car crash. And it was a specific type of car. And so what was it? It was something. So I'm like, okay, so one, don't get in a car that even looks remotely like that, and move around that. It's not logical, and people will think you're kind of crazy about it, but I don't care. You shouldn't care. there are lots of things we do as producers that are crazy. As I mean, seriously, there are things that we do that we have to get done in order to get the production done. I don't, yes, I am research oriented. Yes, I have to rule it out. And I will tell you that even after I wrote the book, you know, I was like, okay, one and done, story's done. My husband became a believer because he had run out of people to ask the questions to. Even people that he thought were so scientific and so analytical, all the lawyers he's worked for and everything like that, they were like, oh, things like something like what happened to your wife happened to me, or happened to this and that. And he's amazed at the conversations that are coming out from this, which has been the most gratifying thing when you're speaking in front of this kind of audience. But I went against my nature for the next few years in searching for hard scientific answers because it was happening in my body. Everybody else was like, no, I believe it. That's great. But you know what? If I have 5 minutes to make a decision, we had one point where we were at a county fair and I had this vision while I was sitting in front of the kids, and Jacob was not even 2 at the time. And we were with another family, and I had a vision. I was going to get the pizza for the family with my girlfriend, and she knows me well enough to know when I get a vision. So you know that feeling when the hair on the back of your neck stands up, there's something wrong. You don't really know. But for me, I can see it all in a few frames. And I said to her, I just had a vision that Jonathan was going to do a fishing game with our oldest, you know, the thing with the bottles and the thing. Adina, our middle, would be crawling around the grass and nobody would be watching Jacob, and he'd walk off and be gone. Now you're at a county fair and there's thousands of people there. So she says, go tell Jonathan. I said, see, we're just fresh out of dialysis, writing a book. You know, he don't want to hear any more of this. Let's just go get the pizza. You go get the pizza. I come back 15 minutes later and they're at the picnic table and I don't see my son. And I'm 100 feet away, and then I'm 50 feet away and I don't see Jacob. And I scream, where's Jacob? And they're like, oh my God. We drop everything and go in different directions. And we find him. And the police officer, he had plenty of time to get an apple juice and hang out with the police officer. So I have no idea how much time that was. And I tell Jonathan's like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I said, I just have one question for you. I said, were you playing this fishing game while Adina was crawling around the grass? And he looks at me and he says, how do you know that? And at that moment, I walked away and I got very sick. And I said, I don't know how much time I have. And so in his cavalier attitude, he was like, you know, well, let's just take your visions as gospel, you know? And then he was like, but don't take advantage of it. And I'm like, you know what, if I don't get that tennis bracelet, you know, something really bad is gonna happen. So, but no, so to answer your question, it took a long time to get comfortable. It's taken years to just get comfortable with it. And I don't think you and I don't need to know whether it's science or spirit. You just need to trust it and you need to believe it. And it will, in fact, save your life.
So we've got a couple of questions here. One from George Harvey Dabbling. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Stephanie, do you ever happen to get premonitions or intuitives through dreams? And if so, do those dreams seem extra real to you, almost as if it had happened or really did happen? I have had several such dreams happen to me about the deaths of some friends and relatives whose deaths actually did follow soon afterwards.
Yeah. Yes, I believe that dreams are that state of semi-consciousness where you can see and feel things around you and you can feel the spirits of people. That's why I always ask, you know, when someone recently dies, did they visit you in a dream? And that's, in my experience, I feel that it's safe to say, oh, my mother visited me in my dream or my father visited me in my dream, because you don't sound like a crazy person. But the reality is that that I think it's a safe way for spirit to show up, because you'd be like, oh, I had a nice dream about my father the other day. I had a friend of my sister's call me the other day, and her mother was in hospice, and she had a very broken relationship with her mother and her father, but her mother's in hospice and she had a dream and her father showed up in her dream. And she's like, why would he show up? We didn't even have a great relationship. I said, he's showing up to let you know that the end is very near, and he's giving you some form of comfort knowing that he's there and he will help her. And so it was right on, because it happened soon after. And I think sometimes, like this one woman said on Facebook to me, she said sometimes her dreams were, she couldn't, even though she inserted herself in the narrative and it still happened and somebody died, the premonition was more for her, to prepare her for the death. So it happened, months before it happened. And another girlfriend of mine, when I interviewed her for something, I said, were you shocked when this happened? Because I'd been telling you for months. And she said, no, because you prepared me.
We have another question from Edgar Pablos. I have a feeling this is the Edgar that I know. How does the information come to you? A whisper, visual images?
It is visual. I will see, and I will feel. So if let's say, it's an energy that I feel when it's around somebody, I know instantly whether it's a mother, a grandmother, or a best friend, or an aunt, or an uncle. I don't know why. I'm not hearing anything, but I feel a warmth, and then I see the connection within a frame or two. And sometimes I'll see a moment by a Christmas tree, or I'll see a moment in the kitchen wearing a yellow apron or something, so that that person knows that I'm actually seeing it. It doesn't happen all the time. It's what I have now consciously said is, like, give me the information that I need to have, because else there's just so much energy, and then I can't concentrate on being the wife and mother I need to be, or the writer for Hawk. So it comes in a mostly a visual sleuthing kind of way. I see the image, and then I talk to that person of, like, why are they showing me this? And then I can help put the pieces of the message together.
Right. So those of you out there, I was a bit of a skeptic, and I read, I read this. Actually, I read the screenplay that she had written before I read the book, and people say, oh, it's not really true, but about 15 years ago, I was doing a movie up in Oregon, and the script supervisor, who was a lovely lady, had told me her story about how she had a C-section, and that she died on the table, and that she was up above the table. She saw everything, and then she went to heaven, and she saw all her relatives, including her grandmother, who said, you're not supposed to be here yet. It's not your time. Go back and take care of your kids. And she survived. And when she came out of it, she told the doctor and everybody in the OR exactly what had happened. And they were amazed, because she was totally out cold with stuff over her eyes, etc. So therefore, it gave me the impetus to say, wait a minute, maybe I'm being stupid and not being too skeptical. This sounds pretty real. So that's why I got involved with you, Stephanie.
Wow.
Anybody else? Mr. Beecher, you got anything? Bob Beecher's our CEO, and a great CEO. He's done amazing work for the fund, and very proud of the fact that we are our home is COVID-free at the moment. Is that right, Bob?
COVID-free for over 20 weeks now.
Yeah.
Hi, Stephanie.
And hi, Bob.
Hi. I've been listening. I told Hawk a while ago, I a couple years ago read Proof of Heaven, and was not moved by it religiously, but moved by the story. And subsequently have read a bunch of books on near-death experiences. The one that Hawk just described is a very archetypal form of it. And I'm listening to your story and crying at various points, because it's so amazing. So thank you for sharing it with us. I did have a question for the two of you, which is, so Edgar asked a question about how these premonitions, what form these premonitions come to you in, and you said visual, feeling and visual. And since you're working on a script, I'm wondering how you're thinking about that from a visual aspect on film. Because it can get, if you do it wrong, it can be very corny. Yeah, you know, like,
You have to be very careful.
yeah.
Very careful. And to have Bob speechless is quite something. You don't know Bob well, but
Have you thought about that? The two of you?
Well, let me ask you a question. Have you seen your mother lately?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Last night. Thank you. Yeah.
So give her a hug.
so we have some other questions coming in.
Oh, no, I didn't get to answer it.
Yeah, you're going to ignore Bob. You're going to ignore your CEO.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Really?
I mean, I know you're producer. Let's keep it going. No, so yes, I am trying to keep it, and what Hawk and my writing.
Whoops.
Uh-oh, we froze.
Stephanie, you frozen.
I have a premonition she'll be back.
Okay.
There she is.
Okay. Did that work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep going.
See, sometimes things just insert themselves. So I try and keep it as experiential as it really happened. And I'm reminded by my writing partner, Rosa, and also by Hawk, that this is based on actual experiences, but then you have to make it much larger. But the reality is the experience of the heaven and the lift off, as I am describing it in the movie, is really like, you know, I go from the perpendicular, by the way that I describe it in the book, is that down to the last heartbeat before I flatline, you are feeling the pressure, you're feeling this. And so then in reality, I was there, the doctors, the nurses, everybody was talking to me, but I had scared myself out of my body. It was almost like I was so catatonic that they were asking me if I was okay. I could not answer. So, you know, the literal scared to death, completely out of my body. So perpendicular. And then when that flash of light, I didn't see that tunnel of light, but the way that I looked at it through my therapy was it was in 3D, where I was the observer looking in on it. But when that flat line happened, it was almost like a shooting star. And so as you see the operating room, the ceiling come off of the operating room, there used to be all the quadrants of that hospital floor, babies being born and things, and then going to the next level and the next level and the next level and the next level until you get to a certain point. So you're seeing, so it's not, you know, oh God, where, you know, with George Burns, but it is that representation of exactly what happened and how I saw floating, going to that next place.
I think in today's cinematic world, I think of the face of the actress, the sound that we're able to use, the music that we're able to have, and the visuals, I think will all create, I don't know why, and it has nothing to do with this at all, but a close-up of Meryl Streep in the movie Sophie's Choice.
Yeah.
And everything that you're asking how we can tell it in a movie was on Meryl Streep's face at that moment.
Right.
So I think that's, to me as a producer, that's what I want.
Yeah.
So we've got a few other questions. I know we only have a little bit more time, so I want to get to them. John Schneider asked, has Uncle Marvin visited you lately?
No, I think that, so Uncle Marvin is the uncle that I had known when I was, that I knew he was going to die. And I feel that, I know that he was the one that was helping me through my premonitions as you read. But no, I think after I was safe and sound, I think spirits come around when they know that you're in trouble or you're in danger. And when you are content and you are there, I think they move on to other family members. And he was there when my dad died recently.
So Sheila Duffy Lerman
Yes.
said, not a question, but a reminder of how Stephanie helped me when my sister passed and me not being a believer at the time. So she's happy to have you share that story.
Yeah, Sheila is a very good friend of mine. Her sister had passed, and she's from California, and we were at the cemetery, and she, it was like as close as a twin could be. That's how close the sister was to her, and she was eulogizing her, and I was in the back of the room, and I just stood up to let Sheila know that I was there supporting her, but I also stood up to let her know that her sister was standing right next to her. And she's like, "You're telling me this right now?" And I was like, I thought it was a good thing. And she's like, "I'm a basket case. And now I need to look around." I'm like, she's here, and she's proud, and she's happy, and she's okay, and she's feeling better, and she's just wanting you to know that she's here. So yeah, those moments are really special. And yeah, Sheila and I have experienced a couple of those together.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Marianne Biddle asked, do you believe in reincarnation?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I was in Bhutan a couple of years ago, and the monks definitely talk about the 49 days and the reincarnation and what have you. I was at a Buddhist temple at Tiger's Nest, which is like you walk up these stairs and everything. And I just asked if I could meditate by myself, and the monk had come up to me, and I said, there's a lot of sadness in this room. I said, "Do you want to feel it?" Now, who the heck am I? Like, these monks study their entire lives. And so he's like, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, if you give me your hand, I can actually share the vibration of what I'm feeling." I said, "There's a lot of pain in this room. I'll take it back, but I'm just going to share it with you." So I share it with him, and the man starts crying like a baby. And he's like, "You're a Dalam." And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Somebody who's died and has come back into their body." And I said, and he didn't know my story. So when he said that, I was freaking out. And then Jonathan was like, "Of course." And he walks away. He's like, "I don't want to know anything about it." I don't know enough about reincarnation. I had spent some time with some Taoist priests in China, and just to understand more of different cultures and spirituality. And I was like, and they believe, like, when birds show up, those are souls of people that but I'm not so sure. I don't have a real opinion about it. I don't poo-poo it, but at the same time, I haven't physically seen the manifestation of somebody I know in another soul or another body or an animal or what have you.
So we have not a question, but a wonderful way to end this, I think. It's from George Harvey Dabbling.
Mm-hmm.
To you and me, thank you so much for this today. I am so grateful that I was here for it. Hawk, thanks to you also. I just ordered the books authored by both of you. For what it is worth, Jennifer, thanks to you too. And we've gone back to George and promised him that we will each sign a copy of our books and get it to George.
Perfect.
So I hope everybody's had a really good time. I know it's been, it wasn't, the first two were more Hollywood. This was, this blew me away, I got to tell you. And I'm glad that I got to hear about Bob Beecher crying, which I think is terrific. So Stephanie, thank you so much. You're a wonderful guest. And I just want to thank you and have a premonition that we're going to, get this movie made.
Yes, we will. Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everybody at the MPTF. Thank you for having me. Thanks, Hawk.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Stephanie.
And Fredda, anything you want to say before we go?
Just thanks to you both. Thank you, Jen, for making this happy. Thank you, Bob, for giving us all the platform to do it. And tune in on September 15th for our next episode. It'll be Tessie and Pearlie, which is a book by Joy Horowitz, and we will be having a staged reading as well. So Stephanie, I hope you can join us.
Yeah, I would love it. Thank you
We'll send
so
the
much.
information.
Can I make a final comment?
Yes.
Sure.
So the transformative thing for me about Proof of Heaven, again, wasn't about religion, and about your story is the is the removal of fear of death. And to me, this is the greatest cross we all bear in our lives, is fearing that for ourselves and fearing it for others, and holding ourselves back in so many important ways because of that. And I think your experience, Dr. Alexander's experience, transformed me personally to believe, that it's just a crossing and a reuniting and a continuum and a change in form. And that is just spiritually, emotionally, such a liberating thing that, I just encourage people to read your book and hopefully get that same feeling from it, because it's a great weight to be lifted off of you.
It's true. It's true. It definitely will make a difference in how you live your life.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you.
Yep.
Thank you, Tom.
And thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye. See you in 2 weeks.